SALT I, Helsinki, and SALT II. SALT I. The first discussions about limiting nuclear weapons resulted in an agreement known as the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, SALT I, in 1972. As suggested by the name of the talks, the agreement was about limiting strategic armaments like nuclear weapons. However, the talks did not limit the amount of strategic bombers each side could have, and there were also no limits on developing new weapons. Nevertheless, SALT I was an important step in developing nuclear arms controls and the policy of détente. SALT I said that anti-ballistic missiles, missiles that can shoot down other missiles, were only allowed at two sites. ABM systems were designed to detect and destroy intercontinental ballistic missiles. As part of SALT I, the so-called Interim Agreement on Offensive Arms introduced a 5-year freeze on the total number of ICBM and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The Helsinki Agreements. The Helsinki Agreements of 1975 were another key aspect of détente. The USA, Soviet Union, and 33 other nations made declarations. These were known as baskets, about three key issues: security, cooperation, and human rights. Basket 1 was security. There was a commitment by the nations involved that recognized Europe's frontiers and borders. Importantly, the Soviet Union also recognized the existence of West Germany. 2. Cooperation. There was also a commitment to closer links between all countries involved. These links involved economic cooperation, scientific and cultural cooperation. And thirdly, human rights. Each country involved agreed to protect human rights and basic human rights like freedom of thought, speech, religion, and freedom from unfair arrest. In 1977, the new US President Jimmy Carter was keen to link human rights to arms limitations. Carter sent a letter to Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov supporting his stand against human rights violations by the Soviet Union. Brezhnev saw this as interference by President Carter and was not impressed. In Eastern Europe, Helsinki groups were set up to monitor the Soviet Union's commitment to human rights after Helsinki. Human rights agreements in the Soviet Union were becoming an embarrassing issue to Brezhnev. Despite the Helsinki agreements, the Soviet Union sent military aid to communists fighting in Angola and Ethiopia and 21 other African states. In response, Carter increased the defense budget in 1978, and this showed what little impact SALT had. SALT II. SALT II discussions started in 1974, and the treaty was signed in 1979, and was meant to last until 1985. SALT II introduced a limit of 2,400 strategic nuclear delivery vehicles for each side. This was something that SALT I had not achieved. SALT II also put a limit of 1,320 MIRV systems and a ban on new land-based ICBM launches. SALT II also limited new offensive arms. However, SALT II was never approved. America did not believe it was possible to know whether the Soviet Union was actually meeting the terms of the agreement, and the US government was especially worried about 2,000 Soviet troops stationed in Cuba. The Soviet Union also invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and this put a lot of pressure on the policy of détente. NATO also put long-range missiles into Europe, and this also added to the pressure. The US Senate refused to ratify SALT II, and some commentators argued a second Cold War was starting.